For more than 63 years, Queen Victoria was the face of an empire. But behind that crown was a woman who wrote everything down. And I mean everything. So today, we're going to dive into her personal journals and use her own words to really get to know the person behind the powerful monarch. So before she was a queen, Victoria lived under this incredibly strict set of rules. It was so controlled that she wasn't even allowed to sleep in her own room. Nope, she had to share with her mother. Now, this was all about keeping a close eye on the future queen, but it also left her feeling really isolated. And that created this deep, deep need for a real connection later in her life.
Okay, so just imagine this for a second. You're 18 years old and you suddenly become one of the most powerful people on the planet. What's the very first thing you do? For Victoria, it was this small but totally profound act of rebellion. She demanded 1 hour completely by herself, something she had literally never been allowed to have before.
That 1 hour, well, it was a huge symbol of her new life. So let's turn to her journal and see what she wrote on the exact day her entire world changed forever.
This is pulled right from her journal, June 20th, 1837. There's no big dramatic announcement, it's just her mom, waking her up at the crack of dawn. You could almost feel how quiet and intense that moment must have been, right before everything changed.
And just like that, within a matter of hours, her life was completely transformed. She met these incredibly powerful men while she was still in her dressing gown. They told her that her uncle, the king, was dead, and that, well, she was now queen. And by 11:30 that same morning, she was running her very first council meeting. I mean, what a whirlwind for an 18-year-old.
So in the middle of all that chaos, this young, pretty inexperienced queen, who'd been raised in almost total isolation, she really needed an anchor, and she found one. Her first prime minister, Lord Melbourne, became an absolutely crucial figure in her early years on the throne.
She wrote this down in her diary almost right away. And what's so amazing is that immediate sense of trust. You can tell their bond wasn't just political. For a young woman who was basically starved of friendship, it was deeply personal, right from the very start.
And this just shows you the huge difference in her relationships. With all the other courtiers, it was just stiff protocol. Kneeling, official announcements, the whole shebang. But with Lord Melbourne, she could have real conversations. She saw him as more than an advisor. He was what she called a kind, impartial friend.
All right, before we get to this next entry, we got to quickly define this word, homage. At a coronation, it's basically the moment where all the nobles come up and pledge their loyalty to the new monarch. It's supposed to be this very formal, very public ceremony.
But look at what Victoria wrote. Right in the middle of this grand public ritual, she and Melbourne have this incredibly human, emotional moment. This isn't about formal allegiance. It's about a genuine, heartfelt connection. It just proves he was so much more than a prime minister to her. He was her trusted guide.
So Lord Melbourne helped guide her through the very beginning of her reign, but another man would come to define the rest of her life, her cousin, Prince Albert. Now, their courtship was anything but typical. They met when she was only 16. But here's the thing. Once she became queen, royal protocol said that nobody could propose to her. So, in a total reversal of tradition, she was the one who had to pop the question.
She wrote this in her diary not long after they got married. It just shows how completely Albert became the center of her entire world. He wasn't just her husband, he was her partner in every single way, and she relied on him completely.
And then, just tragedy. Albert died suddenly from typhoid in 1861. This quote, from a letter she wrote soon after, it just reveals the absolute devastation she felt. The contrast with that earlier joyful diary entry is just heartbreaking. It was a loss that would cast a shadow over the rest of her life.
In her grief, Victoria actually retreated from public life for a while, but her reign kept going, and she evolved from that young queen into the matriarch of a truly global empire.
To put her reign into perspective, think about this number. At its absolute peak, the British Empire, under her rule, governed nearly 1/4 of the entire world's population. The scale of that is, well, it's just staggering.
Her time on the throne, the Victorian age, saw so much change. It went from the incredible optimism of the Great Exhibition, which was a project Albert was so passionate about, to the deep grief of his death, and then all the way to her spectacular golden and diamond jubilees, these huge celebrations of how long she reigned.
This is probably the most famous image we have of Victoria in her later years. Her decision to wear mourning clothes for 4 decades wasn't just a personal choice. It became this iconic part of her public identity. It's how she got the nickname the Widow of Windsor.
So after more than 6 decades on the throne, the Victorian era and Victoria's own long life were finally drawing to a close.
This is one of her very last journal entries, just a few weeks before she died. After all that power, all that history, her own words reveal this simple, human frustration. The formidable Empress of India had become a frail, elderly woman.
She passed away on January 22, 1901, at 81 years old, with her family around her. Her reign, the longest in British history up to that point, was over. Her son Edward took the throne, and a whole new century began.
So when you look back through her own words, you see this incredible story of transformation. From a sheltered girl who just wanted an hour alone, to a formidable queen who leaned on the guidance of a kind friend like Melbourne and the love of a partner like Albert. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's the real foundation of strength for any leader?